The reality of life can be summarized into three words: impermanence, suffering, and no self. The three marks of existence are the essential teaching on the perception of reality. These teachings is the core of Buddhism, which means that every thought, every feeling, every experience that we have is subjective to these three marks. These three simple truths of how we see ourselves on any situation. Everything is impermanent. Suffering is part of existence. Nothing exists in and of itself without these dependencies. These three marks of life are always changing. Life is about change. Impermanence is just a fancy word for change in Buddhism and in Buddhist philosophy, that all existence is temporary. Now, some schools of Hinduism as well believe in this concept, but Buddhism believe and Buddhists believe that this mental and physical life is not permanent. Now, in Hinduism and other yogic traditions, however, they think that both there's impermanent and permanent aspects to them. The first of the three marks of existence is the impermanence. The teaching of the Buddha about impermanence was when he was holding his hand towards the moon and pointing at it and showing that the natural change is in everything, whether it is a person, a place, or a thing. Everything changes. Impermanence is as essential because it's the point. It's so simple that everything is always changing. Everything is born and everything must die. And when you accept impermanence, then you are less likely to cling to the outcomes and the expectations of things. When you understand this principle, then it becomes much easier when you are faced in a really tough situation, maybe such as a job loss or a loss of a relationship or if someone dies. See, when suffering begins, when we cling to the idea that we are always going to be in this situation forever, start exploring the impermanence in you. What areas in your life are you clinging onto? It could be a relationship, it could be a job, or you just expecting something to last. Explore on how the views and you feel when you recognize that everything is always changing. Impermanence is the first of the three marks of existence that is inherent in our physical world. Now, the second mark of existence is the idea that everything suffers. See, suffering or being unsatisfied with life can come in many different forms, such as fear, as anger, boredom, or grief. See, suffering can also be like a general sense or like a natural discomfort that we all experience in our lives. And when we experience something, then we suffer from it, whether it's extreme pain or it could just be something that's irritating. But as common, as long as we start pushing away that pain, we will always suffer. And many of the time, we are trying to avoid this pain. We are trying to push away and not experience it. See, suffering is part of life, but many of us try to mask it or try to escape this experience. And when we avoid our pain, in doing so, we do not learn from it. And when you do not accept your pain, then you do not learning from it. You need to learn from it. You need to grow from it. You need to understand that this pain is part of life. And when you try to avoid pain, and then you're creating more suffering, and suffering ends when you realize that there is nothing outside of you that can last this satisfaction of this permanent. And for example, when you're in this unpleasant situation and you have like a pain in your back, or you have a negative thought, or you hear a sound of music that is disturbing you in your sleep. See, all these can be experiences that are easy, but how about ones that are take away your happiness? You know, many people run into this problem, this idea when you consider that you put it into a happy experience. You're like, how can joy or love or sitting with your loved one be considered suffering? See, you must first understand that suffering is not in the way that we are taught. See, since everything is impermanent, always changing, then your love, your joy, and eating, sitting with your loved one will eventually end. And when you hold on to that thought that it will last forever, then you will suffer. Now, in Buddhism, you are asked to pause when you are doing this, and notice your thoughts and your suffering in your mind when it arises, and just observe them. Then you watch your thoughts as they fade away, and when you do so, you're not wanting to hurt you or the other people when you see them suffer. And when you are suffering, you start to understand others, and you start to see them suffering, and you feel compassion, and you awaken, and you notice the many different types of way that you suffer, and you realize that the others are suffering, and you have more compassion for them as well, and you awaken to the understanding of this mark. Then you can dissolve your ignorance and stop that cycle of endless suffering when you realize that suffering has a solution. Now, the third mark of existence is the idea of non-self. Now, there is no reliable, separate, single self. We are the sum of our parts, which are together make us who we are. Now, there is not one idea that you can have that you can point to and say, oh, that's who I am. See, a lot of people get this teaching confused since it translates into English as no self. Now, some people get the impression that the Buddha was teaching the no self. Now, this idea then is there's no you looking at me, and there's no me talking to you. However, this is not what non-self means. The Buddha was trying to convey here is not the idea of no self, but the no experience lasts forever. The experience is not who you are. So you're asking me, what does this mean? Well, for example, let's say you're walking on the ground and you're walking barefoot, and you receive a sensation and that feeling of your feet on the ground. Now your brain is telling you about that experience. Is it pleasant? Is it unpleasant? Or is it neutral? See, the mind has to respond in a reaction. And the sensation of your feet on the ground by itself has no meaning. And it cannot exist without being dependent on your mind for its response. Now, the principle then can be applied to all of your five senses. That is to say that your emotions, your thoughts, your smells, your sounds, your tastes, your experience, they have no meaning. You give them the meaning, and you process them dependent upon another process. The mind is just a mirror reflecting that experience that you desire. See, every person that you meet, every emotion that you experience, every reaction you feel is reflected on that mirror. And every moment, a new person is walking in front of that mirror, and it's displaying a new image. See, that mirror is the same thing, right? But it's always reflecting and constantly changing. And this is similar to your mind. When we think our thoughts, and then they expand in your mind, causing that change. And you also can close your eyes and just notice that these thoughts, as they arise, and just observe these thoughts and realize that our life is a process. And do not attach yourself to these negative ideas and beliefs, since they do and they will also pass. You are the sum of these multiple causes and conditions that arise within us. Now, this lesson can be confusing since most of us have this misconception of self as something permanent. See, something that we cling to, that we end up leading us to suffering. The existence of life can be summed up into three characteristics: impermanence, suffering, and no self. See, you see here that in things don't last, we cling to the ideas and belief that cause our suffering, and then we are the sum of these things, and you are always changing. Every emotion, every feeling, every moment is always changing. We choose to suffer, and it's the same for our happiness, and happiness is a choice, and so is suffering. And we decide to be happy, or we choose to let our soul suffer. So dissolve the power of suffering by observing these thoughts and transcending them into happiness. My name is Dustin Dunbar. Please follow us on Universal Consciousness, and you have yourself a blessed day.